Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kikuyo. Thanks for joining me for meditation and sutra study. The title of today's talk is Finding the Cure for Anger. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. Today's scripture reading comes from the Abhidharma Samukaya, also known as the Compendium of the Higher Teaching. Not necessary to have a copy of the text, but it's useful if you'd like to follow along. Today's reading comes from page 251, and it goes as follows. Furthermore, he who desires his own edification should engage in a talk with a view to developing his knowledge and not for debating with others. It was said by the Blessed One in the Mahayana Abhidharma Sutra. A bodhisattva who cultivates vigor, who is committed to the favorable, who esteems the practice of virtue, who practices the major and minor qualities, who aids all beings, who should soon attain complete and incomparable awakening, should not debate with others for 12 reasons. What are those 12? Rare is the belief in the propounding of the supreme teaching which contains the incomparable meaning. Rare is the mind which accepts advice from questioners. Rare are persons who courteously examine virtue and vice. Rare is the absence of 6 defects in persons engaged in a talk. What are those 6 defects? Adherence to the wrong party, deceptive speech, inopportune speech, diversion in the talk, coarse speech, malevolence of mind. Rare is the absence of heatedness in a talk. Rare is the appreciation of another's point of view. Even when there is appreciation, rare is concentration of mind. Rare is willingness to admit one's own defeat and another's victory in a talk. Even when one admits one's own defeat and another's victory, rare is purity of mind. When the mind is defiled, rare is agreeable existence. When there is no agreeable existence, rare is cultivation of the favorable. When there is no constant cultivation of the favorable, rare is rapid acquisition of concentration by a person whose mind is not calm, or rapid acquisition of liberation by a person whose mind is calm. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism state, life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. The way to end suffering is to end desire. The way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. However, this raises some questions. Specifically, what is desire as it's understood in Buddhism, and is it always bad? Now, the word desire comes from the tanha word, or from the Sanskrit word tanha, which means craving or unquenchable thirst. So what Buddha is telling us in the Four Noble Truths is that all living beings have an unquenchable thirst and unquenchable craving inside of them. Not necessarily for something more per se, but for something different. In other words, our phenomenal world is always changing, and oftentimes it changes in ways we don't like. It's daytime and we wish it was night. It's winter and we wish it was summer. We're at work and we'd rather be at home. And as the world is constantly changing, as we constantly wish the world would change in different ways, we suffer. We desire a new TV, we get it, and then it breaks. so we suffer. This leads to desire for another TV. And we get this TV and we pay a lot of money and it's big and it's beautiful, but it's not quite as good as we thought it was going to be. So we suffer. And maybe we don't get a new TV, instead we get more streaming services. Desire. And those streaming services cost a lot more money than we want to pay, so we suffer. This is the cycle of samsara, us constantly moving between suffering and the desires which cause that suffering. Thus, Buddha is telling us again, desire is a natural part of life, but that also means the suffering that comes with it is also natural. So it's on us as spiritual practitioners to examine every one of our desires carefully and determine if the suffering is worth the desire, if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak. As an example, there are 3 cats that live with me here on the homestead. Enzo, Finn, and Sam. And I desire for them to be healthy and happy and to live with me for a long time. I am very attached to their well-being. And as a result of that attachment, as a result of that desire, I'm going to suffer quite a bit when they die. I know this. But I've decided that the suffering that will eventually come at the end of their lives is worth me feeding into the desire to love and care for them. So, we know that desire is an unquenchable thirst, and that makes sense philosophically, but how does that actually play out in our everyday life? Well, it plays out in the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. Now, all the problems of human life, all of our suffering can be traced back to one or a combination of these 3 things. And it's important to note that they exist on a spectrum. More greed equals more suffering. Less greed equals less suffering. If we're greedy and we want $1 million, but we're not that worried about it, very little suffering. If we're very greedy to the point where we rob a bank, a lot of suffering, not just for us, but also for other people. Thus, as Buddhists, we practice to reduce greed, anger, and ignorance in our lives, and as we do this, we slowly reduce the level of suffering in our lives, with the goal being that we get as close to 0 as possible for each of them. But this begs another question. If desire manifests in our lives as greed, anger, and ignorance, well, where do greed, anger, and ignorance come from? And the answer to this can be found in the 5 universal mental factors, which are contact, attention, perception, sensation, and volition. These universal mental factors play on a loop in our mind every second of every day. Contact, I see something. Attention, I focus on it. Perception, I determine that it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Everything up to this point is happening in the subconscious. I don't even know it's there. Next, however, comes sensation. And this is where our conscious mind gets involved. We have thoughts and feelings about the object. I like this table. Those are ugly curtains. I wish I had a bigger TV. And those sensations then lead to volition, or us actually doing things in the physical world. The 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance emerge in the space between perception and sensation. In other words, if something has a pleasant tone, we become greedy. We want more of it. If something has an unpleasant tone, we get angry, we want to get rid of it. And if something is neutral, we engage in ignorance, meaning we don't pay attention to the causes and conditions associated with it. Now, anger, again, like I said, is natural because desire is a natural part of life. So we should never feel guilty about having anger. However, we do need to understand that anger can be dangerous, which is why it's one of the 3 poisons. Buddhaghosa, a Buddhist philosopher and the author of the Visuddhimagga, famously said, holding on to anger is like grabbing hold of excrement to throw it at another person. We get excrement on our own hands. So while it's very natural and normal to be angry, that doesn't mean we should hold on to it. Just like it's normal for dogs to poop, we don't want them to poop in the house. So what do we do with our anger? How do we cure it? How do we reduce it? And in doing so, we reduce the level of suffering associated with it. Well, first off, we investigate our anger and determine, is it justified? Is there something happening in our world that I can do something about in order to get rid of this anger? And is it the result of aphasia karma or indifferent karma? So if it's aphasia karma, I'm angry because I overslept and I was late to my meeting. Well, that's a simple solution. Maybe I set multiple alarms so I don't oversleep. Maybe I make sure I go to bed early next time so I don't, again, oversleep. Dealing with that aphasia karma, things that are within our control. Or maybe it's indifferent karma, something that, look, I don't like this, but there's not really anything I can do about it. I had plans to go on a hike today, but now it's raining. I'm angry because my plans are ruined. Natural, normal part of life, but not really something we can do. So we don't need to hold on to this anger, and we don't necessarily need to do anything to fix the world around us. We simply need to accept it and move on. To give another example of how we can work with our anger skillfully, I have a friend who has a large family, including a sister with, 5 kids. And what was happening was my friend would host family events at her home. Her sister would come with her children and they'd make messes, and sometimes they would break things because, kids do that. And then the sister would leave, the family would leave, and my friend was left with a messy house and some broken appliances, which she was angry about, understandably so. Again, not bad to be angry, but we need to work with it skillfully. So first, she took the step of talking to her sister and explaining the problem, hoping that things would change. They didn't. They continued as they were. So instead of holding on to her anger and the resentment that was building between her and her family member, my friend decided that she would hold fewer family gatherings at her house. If the kids aren't in the house, they're not breaking things. If they're not breaking things, there's nothing to be angry about. And when she does hold family events at her house, she holds them outside. So it's the 4th of July barbecue. Everyone's in the backyard and they're eating, they're talking, they're playing. Messes are a lot easier to clean up in the backyard. There's fewer things that can be broken. Less of an opportunity to be angry. So she gets to maintain the relationship with her sister and with her nieces and nephews, but she does it in a way that ends suffering both for her and for them. Everyone wins. So this is the first thing we can do with our anger. Really investigate it, figure out the source, the causes and conditions are making it happen, determine, is there a skillful way to deal with this? If there is, we go down that route. If it's out of our control, there's nothing we can do, well, we practice acceptance and we do our best to move on with our lives. The other thing we can do outside of acceptance, however, is friendliness. Friendliness, acts of loving kindness, moves our attention away from anger and shifts it towards other things. It moves that Overton window from the thing that's making us angry to something that makes us either calm or happy. Going back to the 5 universal mental factors, remember, anger appears between perception and sensation. So if we change the thing we're perceiving, change the thing we're focusing on, the anger dissipates. Friendliness is one way to do this. Engaging in acts of loving kindness towards and for the people around us, or engaging in acts of kindness for ourselves. Now, oftentimes people ask me, how can I engage in friendliness towards my enemies? However, if we look at the sutras, we're told that first, we need to engage in friendliness towards ourselves and towards our friends and family members. Why? Because we want to start on the easy mode first, then build up good habit energy that we can carry over into the rest of our lives. So maybe we're angry about something that happened at work. So as an act of friendliness towards ourselves, we take a long bubble bath, or we go on a walk, or we engage in a hobby we enjoy. And in that act of friendliness, we focus on things that, again, create happiness instead of things that create anger. And our lives improve as a result. The same thing happens when we engage in friendliness towards our friends and family members. We already like them, so it should be easy to be friendly towards them. However, oftentimes what happens with friends and family is we take them for granted. Why? Because our perception of them is neutral. We've known them a long time, so we're not unhappy to see them, but maybe we're not overflowing with joy. And they don't make us angry, so they kind of just blend into the background. And unfortunately, we don't treat them as well as we could. So engaging in those acts of friendliness towards friends and family members allows us to, one, dissipate our own angry energy, but it also creates happiness and joy for them, which has a rebound effect of creating happiness and joy for us. It's a very healthy, very life-affirming cycle. Maybe we make coffee for our spouse. Maybe we take our nieces and nephews on a trip. Maybe we invite a friend out. Hey, let's grab dinner on me. Catch up a little bit. And as we do these things, as we engage in these acts of friendliness towards ourselves, towards our friends and family members, we develop that healthy energy, those mental habits that we then can expand to, hey, let's be friendly towards neutral people. People we don't necessarily have a relationship with. The cashier at the gas station. The person in line behind me at the coffee shop. The server who's bringing my food at the restaurant. And as we're friendly and have loving kindness towards them, now we have lots of momentum, lots of energy that we can direct towards our quote-unquote enemies. Because we're not necessarily focused on the things about them that make us angry. We have so much loving kindness that it just kind of overflows. I've been smiling and saying hello to everyone all day. Sure, I can say it to one more person. And as we do this, again, we dissipate that anger that's within us, lowering it from a 10 to a 7 to a 3, etc. Another way to dissipate our anger is to think about the things we like about a person. Oftentimes when we're angry, we focus in on the things that make us angry. They always leave the toilet seat up. They never take out the trash. I always have to pay when we go out. And I'm not saying those are illegitimate concerns, but if we're trying to let go of that anger so we don't smear excrement all over ourselves, maybe it's healthy and helpful to remind ourselves of the good things they do. Well, that one time that I was really worried about that project, they stayed up and helped me with it. When my pet died, they came over and sat with me until I felt better. They always answer the phone when I call them with a question about home repair. Reminding us about the good things that a person possesses, those good qualities, again, shifts that Overton window. So we're not constantly focusing on the things that make us angry or unhappy. Instead, we're focusing on the things that make us joyful. And maybe we determine that that one thing they did that we really didn't like doesn't outweigh all of the other good things that they've also done for us. And finally, a way we can cure anger, going back to the 5 universal mental factors, is through chanting and meditation. So if anger approaches us, if it manifests in our lives in that space between perception and sensation, we can hijack it at that perception stage. Chanting is one way to do that. So one practice I do is Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha. So if I have something I'm angry about and I feel the thoughts starting to cycle in my head, I start chanting. Namu Amida Buddha, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. And as I chant and I focus on the qualities of Buddha, instead on the things that make me angry, my suffering decreases. It was actually a very powerful practice for me. Several years ago, there was a person who, we'll just say they did something I didn't like. We won't go too deeply into it, but it was quite harmful to me, and it took quite a while to clean up the mess that happened afterwards. And I just could not let go of this anger. It got to the point that I didn't even need to see them. I just needed to see something that reminded me of them. And I'd go into this really unhealthy cycle of thought. So I got a picture of them and I put it above my fireplace. And every time I looked at it, all those angry thoughts came up, as they'd always done. But then I would chant, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha. And as I did that, as I focused my attention away from the thing they did that made me angry and more towards the quality of Buddha, I started to associate that picture with Buddha. I started to associate them with Buddha. And after I did that for a while, when I saw them in person, again, I chanted in my mind, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha. Once again, not thinking on the perceptions and the sensations associated with the bad thing they had done, instead focusing on the quality of Buddha. And now I associate them with Buddha. Not because the thing they did was okay, not because it wasn't hurtful towards me, simply because I don't want to hold on to the excrement of anger. And through that chant, by shifting that Overton window, I've been able to eliminate the suffering I had associated with their actions. Meditation is another helpful thing that we can do. A little bit different than chanting. It's less of us trying to shift the Overton window and us more just not putting fuel on the fire. So if you have a campfire in the woods, for example, if you just don't put wood on it and you wait long enough, eventually it'll burn itself out. When we sit in meditation, that's exactly what we're doing. We're sitting on the cushion, back straight, chin slightly tucked, hands in the meditation mudra, not moving. Our mind goes off into angry thoughts. We bring our focus back to our breathing. We go back off into anger again. We bring our focus back to our breathing, focusing our attention. Remember, it's contact, attention, perception, etc. Focusing our attention on our breath and not on the person. We have all those perceptions, which are neutral because it's breathing, that come with our breath. And now our mood, instead of being angry, becomes neutral. Now we can go out into the world from a place of neutrality and contentment, not from a place of anger, from a place of acceptance, and we're better able to work skillfully with whatever's happening in front of us. So to recap, anger, like greed and ignorance, is a form of desire. Desire is a very natural, normal part of life, but we need to work with it skillfully, determining if the things we desire are worth the suffering that comes with them. Thus, anger is also a natural, normal part of life, but we have to determine If the suffering that comes with our anger is worth holding on to it, I would wager usually it's not. Buddhaghosa would probably agree with me. And there are various ways we can cure our anger. One, through friendly acts towards ourselves and other people, through chanting, through meditation, shifting that Overton window towards things that we enjoy or things that we are neutral towards. And also by simply working skillfully with the things that make us angry, seeing if there's a way to change the situation so the object of our anger doesn't keep popping up. If we do this, anger will still be part of our lives, but it'll be a much smaller part. And suffering will be much smaller as well. Amitabha. So, that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. I'll just end with a few announcements. First, if you enjoyed today's talk, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind liking the video, that'd be helpful as well, both to me and the channel. This was a meditation and sutra study. We do it every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, broadcast right here from this channel. On every Sunday, we do Dharma Sunday, also at 7 p.m., also broadcast from this channel. Slightly different. I take some topic from the news or pop culture. Sometimes I'll read an article, sometimes I'll just riff a little bit. But the idea is I take everyday concerns and speak on them from a Buddhist perspective, tying canonical Buddhist teachings with daily life. So I hope to see you there. Until next time, Amitabha.